And we come back to Hattie, and you now know what John Hattie looks a little bit like. And so he talks about the importance of students knowing what they're learning and how to improve the quality of their work. And that's really what success criteria is about. So I've flipped the PowerPoint, and of course, so if you're going to follow, I probably changed a lot of it. But I can, every night I play with things, right? Because that's what teachers do. They say, okay, this is what I have to do tomorrow. What am I going to do different? And you play with things. So we talked about classrooms as learning environments. Your schools are way more learning environments than our schools. Our schools are halls with boxes, new boxes, old boxes, but essentially they're a series of boxes. Some of them are a little bit more imaginative. We had a feeling that maybe we should create schools that look like shopping malls, right? Students go to shopping for high schools, for upper secondary. And so we played a little bit with that, and there are a few imaginative schools, but most schools are not so imaginative in their space and their design. And I was very lucky last night to be able to go visiting some schools as well. Beautiful schools. Even the older schools, the use of wood, they're quite beautiful. So when we say these are some of the things that we talk about seeing, so you know I'm interested in if there's technology, do we see it being used? If there are books, how old are the books? And are we seeing recent, less recent? So all of those things together are impacting the learning of students. And we see things on the wall which are going to trigger students' thinking. We call them cueing systems, or they could be anchor charts, student work, learning, all of those things that are triggering how students are understanding their learning. I know that you've been working, some of you, on assessment for learning, and so it will be interesting today if we can see evidence of it, right? So then the question is, what does evidence of it look like? How will we know? We should know because there should be something on the student's desk that refers to what has gone before and what's gone on with some teacher input into it. We should see evidence of the teachers having gathered that material and made changes. In Ontario classrooms, we would see evidence on the walls. We would see the learning co-created. So little sticky marks where the students have gone back and tried to make more sense of the material. So the learning goals are the big ideas. Part of the Ontario curriculum is, we would say, discrete. So if you're teaching binomials, you're not doing that in kindergarten. But part of it is spiraled. And so on your tables, I've given you an example of a big idea that goes from kindergarten to grade 12. The same big idea in the curriculum. And this is in the reading strand. And it's about, we would say, response to text. So how do the students make sense of text? For kindergarten, it's the read aloud. Teachers are reading to the students orally. But if you go through to grade 12, students are identifying perspectives, complexity, insights. but it's the same big idea. It just gets a little bit more complex, and we build on it as we move. But that big idea would be the learning goal. So we would go to what is the big idea that we're trying to teach. You're not going to create a learning goal every day, because now we've just made way more work for teachers. But when you're doing a big idea, it goes on. And then teachers and students sit and say, if you understood that big idea, so we would say for little ones, text to text. So if you're doing Little Red Riding Hood, what other stories have we read with wolves? And what connections can we make about being scared, finding your way, what a fairy tale is? Those would be, we would say, a text-to-text connection. And the students would talk with the teacher what that would look like. It could be a text-to-self connection. Wolves are like dogs. I have a dog, or my neighbor has a dog, or I've seen a wolf, or we've been to the zoo. That's a text-to-self connection. And then text-to-world. Wolves are an endangered species. So even at kindergarten, we expect those types of connections. And because, as you know, I have no life, one of my girlfriends, whose head, she has the best job. She's vice principal of digital learning for the province of Ontario. Now tell me this job is not fun for our public broadcasting. One of the schools right near one of our big military bases, and it's a Catholic school, the kindergartens were doing investigation. She sent me the link to the PowerPoint. I downloaded it last night, and I will show you little ones involved in fairly rigorous digital learning. Because if we can have the little ones learn better, then by the time they come to secondary and upper secondary, life is much easier for teachers and school leaders. So we look at the big idea, and then we talk to the students, what will it look like? So remember when we looked at the upper secondary school in Stavanger, and the students had that in front of them. This is the learning goal, and this is how I know how to improve the quality of my work. Those are the things increasingly we would say are non-negotiables. So you don't get to decide if this is a good idea or not. Some things you as a teacher get to make professional judgments on. Some things we say as a province, you don't. That's a culture difference. So part of it is we increasingly have said this is what we expect. And when we wander schools, more and more from the little ones through to upper secondary, in fact, that's what we would be seeing. We'll talk to it in a second. And we talked about the issue of spiraling complexity. So if you take a few minutes sometime during the day and actually go through how we describe in the curriculum response to text, it's complex. We talked about questioning. So we will talk about, as you're thinking of change, change is a 3 to 5 year process. So you will see some gains immediately, but really it's 3 to 5 years. And that means you can't, we call it flavor of the month. We used to have, we'll do guiding routes this month, and next month I think we'll do multiple intelligence, and the next month, right, and we made everyone tired, And everyone just said, we'll just outweight them, because next month it's going to be something else. So when you're thinking of your school, you know your teachers, you know your context. When we're thinking of change, we think first of what we call low-hanging fruit. What's easier to do with gains, and what's more complex to do. So it might be the issue of student voice and questioning. And now when we're in classes this morning, you're going to pay attention to what are the questions, what are the wait time, what are the responses. You may start to say that's easiest to do. More complex is critical thinking and rich tasks. So you don't want to start your teachers off at the most difficult thing, because that's like doing that with students. You're creating anxiety and resistance. So you want to start them off with things they can do and they can feel good about, because if they feel good about it, if they see the differences in students, then they're more likely to try other things. And one of the stories one of my colleagues told me, he was a principal of a little school on Lake Superior, which is in Ontario's north. So let's say was halfway between Thunder Bay and Kenora. So 2 hours to fly to Thunder Bay, then you get on a little plane and you fly another 45 minutes to his little town and school. He had a kindergarten teacher who was 900 years old, and she had been the kindergarten teacher forever. And she believed children should only play. That in kindergarten, children shouldn't learn. They should play, because kindergarten, the job was to make sure the children were social and played nicely with one another. And the ministry said, we actually want them to learn. Play and learn. And she said, no, no, just play. The principal was thrilled. She was in her last year. She was retiring. Was, yes, he said to me. And then she went to a conference, and one of my incredibly skilled friends talked about young children and reading and how she did it. And she got this teacher inspired. And by the end of the year, all of her children were reading. And she went to the principal and she said, I am not retiring. And he thought, oh no. And she said, I finally understand it. And she became a force of change in the school. And when her colleagues would say, oh, they want us to do this, she would say to them, if my children can read, you can do this. And she became the principal's champion. So if we can inspire teachers, if they can see the change they make, then that can be all the difference in the world. So let me show you this little PowerPoint I got sent yesterday night about kindergarten. And it's a big file. And this is this school, St. Francis of Assisi, so you know it's Catholic. It's like my girlfriend's school, Precious Blood. It's a Catholic school. And these are students whose parents serve in, most of them who serve in the Canadian military. You know Canada has a very, very small military, because either the British defend us or the Americans, and we count on it. But we have a wonderful militarily, heavily supported by Canadian population. So they were thinking about questions, the kindergarten teachers and the kindergarten students. And they began to explore. A lot of our kindergarten is grounded in the work of Reggio Emilio. Maria Montessori and Marie Claire. So that's where, and the upper secondary and secondary people can speak to me, and I'll tell you a little bit about that because my background is upper secondary and I have learned about these things. And also they were using iPads. So the students talked about how do they document their learning? Not the teacher, the students are documenting their own learning using electronic device, and these would be students who would be 4 and 5 years of age. So they began to do exploring and taking pictures, and these would be documenting what they were doing. And our classes look like your classes, except we have more stuff up on the wall. And they would have had big questions. So on their little stations, they would say things like, I wonder if, I wonder why. And we have some wonderful, skilled male, of course it's Catholic, kindergarten teachers. So, and this is what the students said. And this is what the teacher thought. So if little ones can do that, think of the learning big ones can do with some structure around them. And so questioning, thinking about questions becomes big. That we think of complexity as a pyramid, but in fact it's probably much more of a spiral. It's like a shell, you know, that goes around, or to go from the inside of the tree out. That's probably really what it is. But we're thinking more about this thinking about thinking. And you will see in classes, we call them cue charts or question charts. Some of them about, so if students are trying to think about what they're thinking about, we give them something that can trigger their thinking. It becomes a cueing chart. Most questions for you that you will hear and see in your classes are here. And that's true. This is where teachers start. And where we want to move students and teachers to is here. And you could translate this into Norwegian and just put it up on the wall. Easily done. Then we began to think about making it a little bit more complex. So easy is who did, who can, who else, you know, where did this happen, where can it happen? Those are, we would call recall and comprehension questions. More complex is when might or how might. Getting students now to move into the analysis and the evaluation pieces. But this is easier for students and teachers to do because we've given them a frame on how to do it. And I can send this to you when, as I said, you know, translate it. And we have these on laminated, big pieces of paper laminated, so then students can take sticky notes and put them up or write on them and rub them off. And so if you're exploring Ibsen, or if you're exploring whales, it doesn't matter because the frame of the questioning are similar frame. We also do what if. So there are famous battles in Norway. One of Canada's most famous battles is the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. So we say to students, what would happen if? Nation building, we built a railway from one part of Canada across Canada. It was an immense undertaking, through bog, through mountains. And we say to students, today, if Canada was to engage in that type of nation building, what would that be? So we're not asking them when the railway was built, how much did it cost, who was in charge. I mean, those are stuff they can Google. We're asking them to think about the event or the technique or the skill and take it one step farther. So think about for your teachers how often that happens. And if it doesn't happen, you don't say to them, you know, I'm wandering and I don't see this happening. It's not happening because they don't understand it. If they understood it, it would be happening. This is where you're their teacher. You're their coach. And then, so if you see things aren't happening, you don't say to them, it's not happening. You say, how can I work with my teachers so they understand this better and I can support them, this happening in the classroom? And so that's why I'm very deliberate about what I reflect back to teachers. So when I see things not happening, part of me says, okay, my advice then to the principal is, you think this is happening, I don't see it. This is a case for professional development again, but this is not a case to make teachers feel badly. Because if they feel badly, they're less likely to make it happen. And that's where you're skilled as leaders. And so we make those judgment calls. Rich tasks are thoughtful tasks. It is really hard to make rich tasks. So one of the questions I sometimes will say to students, because if you say to teachers, are you using rich tasks, what will the teachers tell me? Of course, all the time, all the time. You can ask students, what would make this task more interesting? What would make it more complex? Once students know what complex means, students can tell you. To take rich tasks, this is work of not one teacher, but groups of teachers working together. So you would take a task and collectively you would make it rich. But these are the things that it would have to have. It has to have intellectual rigor. It has to cause children to think. Not remember, not recall, think. And that's a very different thing that we're asking students to do. But if you remember, that's what PISA is asking students to do. And this is what students will have to do when they leave school and the teacher isn't coming with them to the university or to their job. So we have to be able to train our students for this. We wanted to create, we say, substantive conversations, accountable talk. We want our students to be engaged with one another in deep thinking. Not every task is rich. You know, unless you're an incredibly skilled teacher, not every task is rich. But we would say to teachers once a week, we want a rich task. And then we want you to think about how do the students respond to that rich task and how do they respond to other tasks. And let's talk about it. And let's bring back the task and the student work, and together we're going to unpack it. So we do a lot of work, teachers with teachers, looking at student work together. And that also is very new because we used to have teachers come and talk to other teachers. And teachers can talk a good game. But when you bring student work, when you bring the evidence, now this is a different type of discussion. We talk about ill-defined. We want our students to think about problems that don't have an obvious solution. Because if it has an obvious solution, it's actually not causing them to think. We've had students create apps, apps for the school, apps for environment, apps for the government. And they have to think about, you know, what is it the message should be? And why is this important? And I will show you today, often we ask our students, the technical term is note-taking and summarizing. You know, read from the textbook and make notes. I'm going to talk to you, make notes. Watch a film, make notes, right? How many times do we ask students to do this? Robert Marzano says having students do that is a pre-Gutenberg skill. And there's not a lot of research. If you're talking about assessment for learning, think of me. Teacher put notes on the board, I write down the notes. I go home. Number one, right? I can't read my own writing, so who knows what I've written? And it's all on my recall of what I think the teacher said. And how many other students are in the class like me? They don't know what to write and what they're writing and their understanding. So they've written it, but do they understand it? Have they learned it? If I was doing assessment for learning and I'm wandering around, and what do I see? I see students taking notes. But do I know if they know it? That's not assessment for learning. What I'm assessing is compliance. And so I will give you, this is his suggestion for taking notes, and it's called an inverted T-chart. And have I got something to write on here? That's a whiteboard. Have I got something to write on that we can rub off, as opposed to writing on the screen? If not, we can do it when we come back. We'll get some, okay. So this is what they suggest you use. Can be taught, I would say, from about grade 4 on. It's called an inverted T-chart, right? An upside down T. On one side of the T, in point form, what are the important points that you get from reading the book, listening to the teacher, watching the video? To do this, students have to work in mixed ability groups, because weak students, the research says, have fewer of these points. And the students have to talk about, why did you put this point down? I didn't put this point down. The teacher has to model it. I'm going to give you a lecture, and then I'm going to show you what I put down. On this side, students own it. They can put a cartoon. They can put a graphic organizer. They can draw a pretty picture. On this side, they draw whatever they want that will remind them of the knowledge or skill they're supposed to learn. And under, Marzano says summarize, I say get your students to tweet it. They know Twitter, they know tweeting, and tweeting is summarizing. That's what it is. So now we're blending semantic with symbolic, so both sides of your brain are engaged, and you've summarized. I'm the teacher, I can walk by, I can immediately tell, did the students understand it or not? This is assessment for learning. And when they go to university, this is a skill that will help them when the professors talk for 2 hours. And it's difficult to take notes. And it's called, so in his research, he calls it an inverted T-chart or combo notes. And there's a whole body of research behind why this works. Any questions about it? And it's free, right? You can take it back to your teachers and from about grade 4. And it can be done as easily on a computer as it is. So for your students who are using the technology, they can do this on the technology. It's another tool for students to make sense of their learning. And you could have then the students put it up on the class, and now you have documented picture of their understanding or their learning of that knowledge or skill. And you have to practice it, and for your at-risk boys, instead of giving them study notes like this, now they have just very few study notes. And if someone's missed a day and they don't have it, it's easier to give them something like this and have the student talk about it than say, you know, you have to do chapter 25, these 15 pages of notes. So something to think about. We've talked about the data and we've talked about feedback. So I've got 5 minutes and then we're going to take a break. And now I'm going to go backwards. And just to remind you, before we start, I want you to ask the students questions. You were asking students questions yesterday. It wasn't so bad. And they answered you. And I want you to think about your students in your school and what questions that I'm not asking make sense for you to ask with your student, because that becomes important. They didn't make a big deal. They just said, you know, clearly this is something students needed. I saw teachers with students when students were asking a question back so the student didn't feel embarrassed or answering that student. So this is what I'm looking for. I don't have to understand Norwegian to understand that type of gesture. And so then I could say to the teachers, I saw teachers being respectful of students. I saw students being respectful of one another because, again, I saw students helping other students, talking nicely to other students. We didn't see exclusion. And so those are the pieces of evidence also that I'm gathering as I'm walking around. So we're going to do what we did yesterday, but you're going to find it easier today than yesterday because you already have a sense of what you're looking at. So now I want you to pay more attention today about the questioning and more attention about the complexity. Are you seeing tasks that are knowledge and recall? Or are you seeing things that are more than? If you see something that's more than, write it down and bring it back and share it with us, so that we'll begin to get a picture of that. Most of what you will hear in questions and see in tasks will be at the knowledge comprehension. That's true everywhere in the world. We're slowly, just at the beginning, about those rich and more ill-defined and complex tasks. But we're just at its very beginning. So let's take a 10-minute break, and then we'll go wandering at 10:30.
Dere skal vite at hver preteritum heter simple past. Vite at hver preteritum er fortid, det vil si noe som har skjedd. Og så skal dere vite forskjell på uregelrette og regelrette verb i preteritum. Det har vi også jobbet med tidligere. Dere husker kanskje også at uregelrette og regelrette verb heter noe annet også. Vi har brukt litt forskjellige. Det heter sterke og svake verb. Så det er det vi skal jobbe med den timen her, og litt utover. Er det noen av dere som kan et regelrett verb? Opp med hånda. Isabel? Ja. Kan du skrive det verbet i preteritum? Kan du komme og gjøre det? Så må du fortelle meg hva du gjør for noe. Wow. Ja, flott. Du legger til ED. Er det noen som kan et verb i preteritum som er uregelrett? Kjerstine? Ja? Ja? Kan du skrive det i preteritum? Ja. Paul ble til hva for noe? Ja. Hva skjedde? Ja. Vokalen gikk fra A til E. Bra. Ser du det? Er det noen som kan gi meg et uregelrett verb til? Atle?
I preteritum?
Ja. Hva står det der? Hva er det verbet i presens eller i infinitiv? Drink, ja. Hva skjedde? Atle?
I-en ble byttet ut med E. Nei, A.
Ja. Hva kaller vi de bokstavene?
Vokal.
Helt riktig.
Skjønner du forskjellen da? Det er veldig ofte bare ED på slutten, er det ikke det?
Ja.
Da er det jo... Skjønner du hvorfor du skal gjøre det?
For å lære seg.
Er du bra i engelsk, eller?
Sånn passe. alltid læreren. Jeg skal alltid sitte ved siden av hverandre. For jeg spør læreren, for jeg sier at de skal gjøre, at de skal spørre læreren. Med mindre det er sånn, men noen ganger på noen oppgaver så sier de at det er greit at hvis du trenger hjelp så kan du spørre de ved siden av, det sier de noen ganger. Så det er ikke så greit. Det vet jeg egentlig ikke helt. Det er greit begge deler fordi man får hjelp på begge måtene. Ja. Jeg fant ikke ble noe.
Nei, skjønner jeg. Du har forstått hva du skal gjøre. Synes det er lett, eller synes det er vanskelig?
Jeg synes det er sånn passe.
Hvis du trenger hjelp, da, når du kan spørre her da?
Læreren.
Ikke sant. Men har du anledning til å spørre noen annen da, eller?
Ja, hvis jeg jobber 2 timer.
Ja, ikke sant. Gjør du det ofte, eller?
Ja, innimellom. Det er sånn, ja, vi pleier spesielt i RLE, så har vi sånne der gruppeprosjekter og ofte noen ganger.
Ikke sant.
Ja, jeg synes vi lærer ganske mye på, da bruker vi ofte PowerPoint til å skrive ut sånne der, ja, likhet. Vi hadde presentasjoner om likhet mellom islam, jødedom og kristendom og sånt i forrige uke.
Når jeg hører du snakker, så høres det ut som du liker best å jobbe sammen med. Gjør du det?
Ja,
Ja, det skjønner jeg, det hører jeg. Vi jobber litt alene nå, da.
ja, jeg spiller jo fotball, så det er en grunn til at jeg liker å jobbe sammen med.
Ikke sant, så fotball er gøy, det er helt enig. Takk skal du ha.
Skjønner du hvorfor du må lære det her?
Ja, hvis ikke så kommer jeg ikke videre i livet.
Hva da? Hvis ikke så?
Kommer jeg ikke videre i livet.
Det var godt svart.
If T is the most important in terms of impacting student learning, what I want you to do is just for a few minutes talk about, for you in classes in Norway, of the I, the D, and the E, what is the next most important for impacting student learning? So T, that's a given. You heard Elmore. Wanders around your school, looks at the assessments, he'll tell you how your kids are doing. He doesn't really even have to speak a lot to the teachers. He'll speak to the kids, look at the assessments, wander in and out of the rooms, done. That's scary. But for Norway, for your classes, which is the next one that you think is really important? Take a few minutes for that, and that'll be another focus then for this afternoon. So when we come back, and we're going to put this all together, we're going to make the T thicker, and at your table you're going to make one more letter thicker, your choice. You could say to your teachers, right, because we want the teachers to be talking so they can get the students talking. Of all the things you do in a week, what is most important for your student learning? Talk among yourselves, you say to your teachers. And what are they talking about? Are they talking about the task? Are they talking about instruction? Likely not design. But they likely are talking about what they see are the student and student engagement in learning. But that's an easy way for them to talk. You can say to them, if we were to go wandering into your classroom, all of the teachers, and they could pay attention to just one thing in your room, what would you have them pay attention to and why? That's another way of getting at that learning process piece. So, it's now 1 o'clock and it's time for us to wander again. So when your teachers think about the immigrant students, right, we think sometimes in 1962 because that's how we were taught. And the impact of HIV/AIDS in Africa is unbelievable. So my daughter, the epidemiologist, that's her area of expertise. In Malawi, a third of all adults are HIV positive and will not admit it because it's a shame. And when a third of your country is something, I was shocked that it's still a shame and people are still lying and dying because they're lying about it. So culture, perceptions, you know, when you're thinking of your teachers, you know, what is the culture, what is the perceptions that we're still dealing with? So he's great. I have a couple of his clips. He makes statistics interesting and fun. So I'm going to give you a piece of chart paper. On it, you're going to create a cross, and you're going to put time so that if you're looking out, you can see each one of the letters. So this would be the perspective of you sitting around the table. And that's the first thing that I want you to do. So you're going to create the cross, and you're going to put the tide around it. That's the first thing. And you're going to put T-I-D-E. So when you look out at it, you can see what the letter is. This is being compliant and wandering around. I'm checking for comprehension, right? There's no thinking here. So I'm doing assessment for learning. Were my instructions clear? Yes? All right. Now you're going to take what you saw this afternoon. We're starting this time with this afternoon. And in the piece that's closest to you, you're going to write in what your impressions are. So if the T is facing you, you're going to write about the T. If the I is facing you, you're going to write about the I. If there's 5 of you, that means 2 of you are sharing. And we're going to write for a few minutes, and then we're going to turn the paper. So by the end of it, we will have filled it with just this afternoon to begin with. And then we're going to add the morning. Today we are going to present the things we could tell the teachers. Bettina's going to take all of the sheets. Tomorrow we will talk about those other things and what we do about that, and issues of resistance and the fact that not everyone jumps up and down and says, yes, change, wow, you've made my day. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow, but today I want to hear from you what you think you saw that's important for the teachers to know. And why don't we start?
Okay, this is what we saw and what can be a response to the teachers. We saw goals written on the smart board or on the whiteboard. We saw also written exercises. We saw some different kind of tasks when it comes to levels. We saw a program for their work. We saw dialogue with the students, but also micro-teaching. We saw modeling from the teacher, and we saw very clear and easy to understand instructions.
We saw a lot of different tasks. We saw the book report, where the children were working individually. We saw the music lesson where they were all working together in a rap song. And the E, the engagement. We saw very polite and compliant students. We saw engagement when they were working together in the science class. We saw then a lot of reflection going on and discussion about the task.
We saw some tasks that challenged students on comprehension and deeper insight. And they were challenged to write more difficult. When they had finished one task, they were challenged to take it up a bit. On I, what was similar was pretty much this ping pong, but we saw a quite good communication between teacher and student, and we saw a good method to at the end of the class to evaluate and to summarize the daily task. And they were eager to show us their work, and they were eager together. And they were working together. Yeah, they helped each other, not just sitting beside each other.
What we saw was the use of the teacher using the smart boards, and we think they was clever and did it well. We saw engaged students this afternoon, more than we did before lunch. And we saw students supporting and helping each other. And we asked them if they knew why they were doing the task, and they did know why they did it. So
we don't have much to add, but we saw some differentiation in tasks. They worked on a worksheet and they could choose. And also in another English class we saw some differentiation. You could write a story or argumentative text. We think that the transmissions between activities was good. Not much noise, and when they changed from one area to another, they were quite quick and quiet. We also saw a video, or the pupils, students saw a video, and they were given different instructions to each time they saw it. And that seemed quite inspiring.